Hi, and welcome back. I'm Mike Quincy.
I'm Ryan Pulakowski.
And I'm Kelly Funkhauser.
So let me be the first of many, I'm sure, to welcome you to the new year, 2023. And speaking of 2023, we have our first impressions of the 2023 BMW i4 M50. This is an all-electric model. It looks like a low-slung sports sedan with a coupe-like silhouette and a convenient hatchback. Kind of like, I don't know, a Tesla Model 3. So BMW is rolling out a bunch of EVs these days, perhaps punching back at Tesla for stealing all those sales. The i4 lineup starts with a 281 horsepower eDrive 35 with rear-wheel drive and an estimated 260-mile range, and goes all the way up to the 536 horsepower M50, that's our test car, which has a dual-motor configuration that gives it all-wheel drive and a 271-mile range. Standard active safety systems include forward collision warning, automatic emergency braking, pedestrian and cyclist detection, blind spot warning, rear cross traffic warning, and lane departure warning. The i4 starts at $67,300. We got the Driving Assistance Pro package, which I'm sure Kelly will tell us a little bit more about, a few other odds and ends. Bottom line came out to $73,245.
Woo!
So,
That's a lot of money.
Not inexpensive, but we are talking about BMW right now. But
Sure.
before we get into the driving, Ryan, let's talk about how it's styling. I mean, it just kind of looks like a normal car. Is that?
I know.
Is that for real?
I'm so thankful for that. It looks like a normal car because it is based on a 4 Series Grand Coupe. And looks like a normal car. You know, a lot of EVs nowadays are based on, they're based on themselves. They set out to make an EV, so they start with a battery and kind of build a car around it. This is kind of like an old school approach. Some of the early EVs were like, remember the Volkswagen Golf E was a Golf, they did stuff the battery in it, right? This is sort of like what they did there. I mean, obviously the bottom of this car is a lot different than a regular 4 Series Grand Coupe with an internal combustion engine, but it's, you know, it looks like a normal car, which I think is kind of cool because some people want an EV, but they don't want to look like they're driving around in a space shuttle. I mean, let's face it. You know, some of these EVs, even some of the hybrids, they look kind of futuristic, and this is kind of a different approach. This looks like a regular 3 Series, and I think, you know, BMW's done it before. Remember the i3? It was the i3.
Yep.
I mean, that was a goofy looking car, in my opinion.
The i8.
Yeah, the i8. Yeah, and those were like whatever in between hybrid-y things, right? The i8 was actually pretty wild looking, but still very futuristic. This looks like a 3 Series or you know, 4 Series Grand Coupe, and I think that's fantastic because there's a lot of BMW owners, I think, out there that would like to have a normal looking EV.
They're not trying to make a statement. It's not like the Hyundai Ioniq 5 or the Rivian, to name a few, which really look, I don't want to say goofy, but they don't look like kind of a regular car. I mean, when you think about Tesla, no one confuses anything but being a Tesla.
Right. I actually think that it's nice and refreshing, like what Ryan was mentioning, that there is this option now to have kind of a normal looking car, but it happens to also be completely electric.
Right.
I think that we're lacking those in the market right now, and not everyone wants to have the thing that everyone's turning their head when they pass by. So I think even, you know, going beyond the outside into the inside, it looks more like a traditional car. And so if that's what you're looking for, it's nice to have this added to the options.
So it reminded me of the second generation Prius, which had the 5-door hatchback.
Yep.
And it was in direct competition with a Honda Civic hybrid, which just looked like a Honda Civic. So when you think about the sales numbers, though, the Prius absolutely creamed the Civic in the marketplace. And there was no question that you were, you know, you're a green consumer, you're driving a Prius, and you're kind of making a statement. Clearly, BMW is not worried about that. They're not focusing on that. They're just saying the market is calling for EVs. People like BMWs, maybe people even like traditional BMW styling. So we're not going to go wacky here.
Right, and they have other options, right?
Right.
They have the iX that we rented one several months ago. Yeah. So they've got the EV dedicated built around the battery one. So this just, you know, adds to the portfolio of having options.
Back then too, I think EVs and hybrids, whatever it was new and exciting. Like that was like a thing, right? And we didn't have an option. Now we have options. So it's like, well, I think there is room in the market for a regular looking EV.
Right, and so when you look past the styling where the rubber meets the road, Ryan, let's talk about how it drives.
Drives quite nice. I mean, as you know, I mean, an EV car has a giant battery on the floor, right? So it's heavy. So the center of gravity is quite low. Is it as light on its feet as a regular 3 Series or a 4 Series? I would say not quite. But
I don't think you could say electric vehicle light on its feet ever.
You can't, right? But I would say this thing handled itself very well, and it's really well balanced. It is all-wheel drive, so you know, you don't get that balance that you would get with just a straight rear-wheel drive BMW from the good old days. But it's fantastic. I mean, it turns in nicely. It's fast as all get out. I mean, the thing moves right along when you want it to, which will diminish that range, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But it rides pretty well. I mean, it's a nice, really nice car. I mean, you feel like you're driving a regular old BMW, but it's electric for the most part. And I think they kind of hit the nail on the head there, because they have a name to live up to, right? The ultimate driving machine. So
it's the ultimate plug-in machine, maybe. But Kelly, you and I really had an agreement here about the whiny motor noises,
right?
That it seems to be constantly making. But I guess you can turn them off.
Yeah, so it drives like a BMW, but it has a different sound. It definitely doesn't sound like what you would expect a BMW with, you know, a gas engine in it. And it has this somewhat artificial whine to it of the motors.
I will say it's very artificial. It's like,
all right, we'll go with very artificial. It's artificial.
Yeah.
It's really kind of like a whiny and winding up as you increase your speed.
Yeah.
I found it to be distracting and a little bit obnoxious, and you know, I would like to turn it off. If I can turn it off, I would turn it off. You don't really need that. I kind of like the silence of a lot of EVs, so I prefer that. But then, you know, you do get the wind noise, so it kind of balances out the overall cabin noise. So you'll play around with that if you get this car, but I personally didn't find it very enjoyable.
I mean, in BMW's defense, it's not the only car company that pumps in artificial noise,
not even
whether it's internal combustion or EV.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of with you on this. When I'm in an electric vehicle, part of the point is it's quiet. It's quiet.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be calming.
Right.
And BMW is like, no, we're going to remind you of a BMW.
I found one of I think it was a sport mode. It gives you a little more of that.
Right.
I didn't mind it, actually. I'm embarrassed to say it, because in a car like that, it's fairly sporty. It was very sporty. You want to, you know, kind of drive it like it's meant to be driven. I like that noise. I think the silence is a little weird when it's that sporty. I don't know. It's kind of weird for me, but it didn't bother me. But I understand it's artificial. I mean, heck, BMW puts artificial sound in some of their actual M3 and stuff. It's like, oh my word. But there's reasons that they do it. So.
But and as I mentioned in the intro, Kelly, can you tell us about the Driving Assistance Pro package?
Yeah, so this is a driver assistance package that includes all the way up to what you may have heard of SAA Level 2, which is basically active driving assistance combination of lane centering assist and adaptive cruise control. So it will control the speed and the steering within the lane for you. With BMW, they continued from other previous models to have a driver monitoring camera inside the vehicle. It's an infrared display in front of or behind the steering wheel, looking to make sure the driver is attentive. But it's not quite useful to really make sure the driver is paying attention when they're using the active driving assistance system. It only works in very specific situations where you have gone on a highway and you've gone up to speed above, 40, 50 miles per hour, and you're following a car in front of you, and that car starts to slow down. Then you drop your speed below 40, and then you now enter this no indication on the display. You're entering into basically traffic jam assistance. And then the camera will come on and increase the amount of time that it asks you to tug on the steering wheel to say you're alert. So really it's just kind of this gimmick and not overly useful. It doesn't align with Consumer Reports recommendations for driver monitoring cameras, but it's there. We'd like to see it, used in more situations, but it's partway there.
Okay. So, but we went out of our way to make sure that our car had this.
Right.
And this is a very exciting episode of Talking Cars because we have a BMW expert And we have an ADAS expert.
I'm an expert. She's an expert. I'm not an expert. I will add, though, that this has, similar to a couple cars we've had in the past now, the Audi Q4, the EV, has this adaptive regen braking mode. I don't know if there's an official name that we've given that, or there is, but if you're driving just normal, no ADAS or anything on, and you're just driving along, and you're coasting up on a car, it like regens for you to keep that gap. Sort of like an adaptive cruise, but while you're just driving normally. I think that's brilliant, and it works quite well in this car too. So,
I found this. I agree with like your driving assessments and the whining thing. I find this car very, very well balanced.
Yeah.
More so than a lot of EVs, and like most EVs, so incredibly fast it almost just pulls your eyeballs out of
this thing
your
is quick.
head.
It's up there.
One of the things I did notice in the logbook is pretty universal comments about how good the seats are. One of the comments that I particularly like was, "You'll run out of juice before you get uncomfortable in these seats."
That's pretty good.
Which is a real characteristic of BMW. I think that they make some of the best seats
they've always had really good seats
in the industry, and really pleasing that ours continues that trend. Very nice fit and finish. I will say one thing that I noticed: the back seat is hardly a back seat.
Yeah, no, it's there for looks.
There for looks.
Insurance reasons. It's a 4-door. Right? No, I agree. I mean, I sat back there briefly, and it was very brief because I don't fit back there. There's not a lot of leg room, and the headroom is dismal. But,
but speaking of which, I liked the fact that it was kind of more of a compact size car, right?
Yeah.
Going back to talking about how a lot of automakers are having a battery pack and then building a car around it. Those often tend to be these larger sedans, right? Yeah. And so the fact that, it's the shell of a smaller car, and there's a battery in it, surprisingly more range than I would expect for being such a sporty and compact car. I actually found that nice.
But
I agree.
But speaking of range, so as I mentioned before, ours has a 271 mile range, according to the EPA. Is it competitive enough? I mean, when you talk about Lucid models offering 400 to 500 miles of cruising range, Tesla Model S, we mentioned before, EPA rating up between 272 and 405 miles. Even the Ford Mustang Mach-E, which we tested, delivers between 224 and 314 miles of driving. So, Kelly, you mentioned that the compact size is nice to drive, but do you think this 271 mile range is competitive enough?
I'll turn it back to you. Do you think that this is a car that people are going to be taking on long trips? I see it more as kind of a daily driver, someone that's going to completely deplete the battery over 200 miles in a day. Maybe this isn't the car for them. Yeah. But if you're looking for something small and sporty that you don't have to charge every single night, you can still get multiple days out of, 200, 250 miles of range, even in the winter. I think that it is fine for this type of car.
So I would counter that a little bit by saying a $73,000 daily driver for only 271 miles.
Yeah.
So I mean, I get what you're saying, but that's a lot of money just to tool around town.
It is. She brings up an interesting point because it is smaller. I mean, people aren't probably taking this across the country.
Well, no, they're not doing that.
You'd be comfortable though if you did.
Almost any EV, almost any EV.
Right.
You're not going to say, well, we're driving from Connecticut to Florida. Not unless you're going to take a lot of time. Yes, it's I understand it is technically possible, but that's not what EVs are designed for.
Yeah, I mean, 207 is it 271? Mm-hmm. I'm always the guy that harps on range. There's never enough range for me because I get anxious about it. But
for those
to her point, it isn't. It's an expensive daily. If your commute and it's situational, depending on your lifestyle. If you have a situation where you commute and that's enough range, you could charge it maybe every other day or at night, and that can be your daily car. Then that's pretty sweet. It's all-wheel drive,
right?
So you can go take it skiing if you wanted, but you better plan that out.
I don't know if you can fit your skis in it.
Yeah.
Well, you'd have to put them on top.
It's interesting that you brought up skiing because I thought about, we all live in Connecticut. A number of us like to go skiing or snowboarding, and to cruise up to Vermont, maybe Vermont and back in a day.
Yeah.
That range would give me stress.
Yeah, no, you're not. You're not doing it really. I mean, unless you're going to some southern, mountain closer to us, but
right.
Most reasonable ones, you're over your 300-mile round trip, and that's in the cold. And then if you put skis on the roof, forget it,
right?
Because now you're taking your range down even more.
Right. So we're not trying to restate the obvious. We understand electric vehicles are not for long distance driving. We get it.
Yeah.
We get it.
Not for cold driving, not for long distance. And this
but it's
one
also
is small.
a very expensive daily driver.
Right.
It is.
I mean, let's face it.
It is.
So, there's kind of our first impressions of the i4. Check back to consumerreports.org for more information on this car, including a first drive. It's very exciting. We're excited to have this car because really it does feel like a BMW, and that's a very good thing. So that brings us to our questions. Time for questions from the great audience that we have at Talking Cars. We love them. Keep them coming. Text 30-second videos. Send them all to talkingcars@icloud.com. That's talkingcars@icloud.com. We've got one from Mohammed from Granger, Indiana. Why does the DC fast charging port on every non-Tesla EV have a separate plastic cover apart from the regular charging port cover? It seems like an unnecessary piece, which adds an additional step to the charging process and is so flimsy that it might break off within a few years of owning the car. Is there a logical explanation for having that separate cover? So, Kelly, we kind of gave you a little homework assignment. You checked into this. What'd you find?
Yeah, so for those who are unfamiliar with the charger on a car, usually the setup, the standard, unless you're, Tesla or some other proprietary type, is there's kind of a circle on the top, which is the AC charger. Normally, those are the type you might have at home in your garage. And then there's a second component of it that's more of an oval below that circle, and that's the DC fast charging port. So when you're at home, you're likely, again, just using that circle, the top part. And so it makes sense to have a dedicated cover for the lower portion to cover up that DC port when you're not using it. Because over time, just even the dust in your garage, say you have a carport or you're outside charging, you don't want all that debris getting into the prongs of that to, deteriorate and build up all that gunk over time. So it's nice to have that little cover. Yeah, it may be a little bit flimsy, but overall, if you're not doing a lot of the DC fast charging, you may not be opening it very often. So having that when, closed, when you are out in the elements or even just charging in your garage, just gives you that extra lifetime of maintaining the charge port.
Mm-hmm. I mean, going forward, we're going to see how these EVs are holding up over time. I thought it was interesting that Mohammed said, is this just going to break after a while?
Yeah. Well, and to Kelly's point, I mean, I think most people are probably using that port less, right? Mm-hmm. But then, if you get debris and stuff in there, and then you actually go to use it, debris and stuff causes, makes the connection not as good, creates resistance, which creates heat, and now you have all kinds of other issues, probably, maybe. Right. So it's just it's a cheap little piece of plastic just to cover it with a peace of mind. Why not cover it? If you're not using it.
And in the car actually we're talking about this episode, the BMW i4 actually had two pieces of plastic in this car specifically. It had one that covered the AC and the DC. So now, this one, it's maybe not be necessary to have that additional one, and you are going to open that every time you're charging, whether it's AC or DC, right? Yeah. So that one might break off, but ultimately it is nice to have that extra piece for the bottom DC part.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about how Tesla really has taken over EV sales. I mean, they're the number one selling of electric vehicles. And whether if they design their ports a certain way, does the rest of the companies have to follow suit, or is it it seems to be breaking off? I mean, we need something universal, something that all of them can use at every charging place, whether it's at home or out and about driving around and stuff like that. So the world of EVs continues to evolve, and Consumer Reports continues to follow them. Check back for all of our latest information on all kinds of electric vehicles. Well, that about do it for this episode, which was produced by Dave Abrams and put together by Andrew Belize and Mr. Shumsky, Anatoly Shumsky, which I can never get his name right. As always, check the show notes for more information about the vehicles and the topics that we talked about. Keep your questions coming. TalkingCars@icloud.com. That's all we got for this week, but we really appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next time.